Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and anyone anywhere beyond or in between. Welcome to my very first speed build. I am so excited to be making this video. I've wanted to make videos for so long, but I just never had the gumption to do it, but I guess I found my gumption somewhere in the woods, probably. So, for my first video, I decided to do something a little more simple than some of the builds I've shared with you guys on the gallery or Reddit or other things, because making videos is completely uncharted territory for me, and it's completely overwhelming. It's comically difficult to do, especially if you're mildly psychotic like I am. So, I didn't want to get too big for my britches too quickly, but I already feel pretty big. Anyway, so as you probably read in the description, or you could clearly see in the intro to this video, we are making the Borden House. Yes, ma'am, the Lizzie Borden House. Sure, it looks simple and mundane from the outside, but it is not mundane. Pinky promise. So before we get into the story of Lizzie, I want to just kind of touch on what I'm doing in the build here. One thing that you will note that I do regularly throughout this build is resizing around the windows. I like to do my historic and recreation builds based on points of interest. So when you see a structure that there are lots of documented pictures of and drawings and sometimes floor plans and all that kind of good stuff, you have to gauge how big your structure is by points of interest, and 9 times out of 10 I use windows. So regularly throughout this, you will see me changing up the windows and therein changing up the floor plan or the size of the building. Right here, what I'm doing is I am adding a trim just above the windows. Technically, this should only go if this is up here, if there's a story above it. But because you saw me place that flat floor on what was technically the roof level, that sort of tricked the game into thinking there was a third level, so you're able to place that trim there to add a little more detail. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. I just did a little small rectangle of separated floor so that I could put this trim just above the door frame. That's a little tip that I use for detailing builds. If there is an easier way to do that, someone please leave it in the comments and let me know, because most of what I do in these builds I either learned from other YouTubers or I just kind of made up, and sometimes when I make things up, it's a really convoluted way to do things. Here we are again, I'm working with the windows. The house itself is a very green house. You will see in the pictures that I'm going to put up so you can see what I'm referencing. I think that the house is actually a little more green than the siding that I ended up using, but I decided to use that green because I wanted there to be a definitive contrast between the windows and the siding. So even though this green is a little more muted than I would have originally liked, I am doing this as a base game only build. Hopefully I'll remember to put that in the description of this video, but if I don't, know that there are no packs used in this. It's completely base game. I'm working on the floor plan, and while I'm doing that, I just want to get into a little bit of Lizzie and her life. So Lizzie Borden, she lived in the late 1800s in Massachusetts. She was from a pretty religious household. They were modest, but very comfortable. Her father was a successful man. And Lizzie's mother died when she was, young-ish, and her father ended up remarrying a woman named Abby. Well, Abby and Lizzie did not really see eye to eye. Lizzie saw Abby as pretty much a gold digger who just married her father to get at that money. And Lizzie was not a fan of this idea. So Lizzie and her sister Emma and Abby Gray was her name, and Abby's family were kind of, butting heads all of the time. And this butting of heads came to a head on the morning of August 4th, 1892. Abby was attacked at about 10 a.m. by an unconfirmed assailant. I'm saying that with air quotes, even though you can't see me. In the guest room of the house. And by attacked, I mean repeatedly cleaved by a hatchet over 17 times. Her father had left the house earlier that morning for his usual morning walk, but he returned shortly after Abby met her untimely demise. And Lizzie testified in court that her father came home and immediately lay down on the sofa to just take his usual nap. which I'm going to go ahead and say isn't a lie, because he did lay down and take a nap. A permanent nap. Because he too was murdered. Lizzie was arrested and detained and taken to trial, and there was a lot of evidence pointing in her direction. Even though fingerprinting was already a thing at the time, nobody thought to fingerprint the weapon, which they did find in the basement, which I sort of make reference to by putting knives in the murder basement. But they didn't fingerprint the weapon, and somebody, I can't remember exactly who, but actually saw Lizzie burning a dress. She said she got paint on it. I add painting supplies to that little back building as kind of a nod to that little tidbit. But she was burning a dress, nobody fingerprinted the weapon, and yet she was set free. People say, the prosecution said that her testimony was erratic and contradicted itself regularly, but lo and behold, she got off scot-free, so she was an orphan at that point, but she was also an heiress. I mean, it's up to you to decide whether or not you think Lizzie Borden did it. There are a lot of theories out there about what actually happened, each one as disturbing and unlikely as the next, so feel free after you watch this video to look some up, if you're in the mood to stare at your computer screen in abject horror. Like I have a tendency to like to do. Here I am working on this little side porch here. I actually spent a lot longer making this than I should have, because I did this completely backwards. What you should do if you ever want to do a side porch is what I'm doing now, which is, add a floor section, then add your stairs, but for some reason I decided to do the stairs, then battle with it for a good 5 minutes, of which I cut out. You're welcome. And then add the floor section later. So anyway, if you want to do a side porch, any porch really, even if it's just a step up, start with floor, then add your stairs. You'll save yourself a lot of grief. And there's a lot of things that need to be saved in this build, including some Sims. Alright, so this little back house, I actually didn't have a lot of reference material for this. I don't know why the side is brown. It looks like it's kind of a sliding door or something, but I'm not 100% sure. What I wanted to do when I was recreating this is I didn't want to make it as it stands now. I wanted to make it as close as I could imagine when Lizzie lived there. So now it's actually a bed and breakfast. So you can go and you can stay in this house if you feel so moved to do that. If you live in Massachusetts, and if you've ever done it, let me know. I would be very interested to know what that actually entails. But anyway, it's obviously been updated. There are more amenities. They didn't have electricity and running water, even though that was a thing at the time, especially for wealthier people. I'm sure they do now. At least I hope so. So again, if anyone stayed there, let me know. So I went ahead and jumped forward to doing the kitchen. I went and I basically just covered the walls in a bunch of floral wallpaper. And side note, this is not my interior design style. I do not take the blame for this monstrosity of flowers and weird shades. I used the ugliest curtains imaginable, but they're the closest thing I could find to realistically what the inside of the house looks like. Again, I'll put up some pictures so you can see, and so I don't have to feel as awful about the state of this home. I know that anyone who's interested in playing with this, it might give you a headache pretty regularly, but it's authentic, so you can at least feel kind of like a hipster and say, well, this is the real Lizzie Borden house. Whatever, there are no computers in here, there's no TV. There are two, living rooms, basically. There's a sitting room, and then, a drawing room, or a parlor, that's what it was. So they're basically the same thing. You'll see me decorating them, they're just couches and chairs. One of them has a fireplace. I think I only put a fireplace in one of them, I can't remember. But they're pretty similar, but one of them is definitely more noteworthy than the other. This is the main parlor, so when you first come in is where they would greet you. I don't actually end up keeping these curtains because they're not ugly enough. You gotta get really ugly on this. But so this is where you would at first come in, and this, when it comes to this house, is actually a rather boring room. And you'll see me do this a lot. I get the room situated backwards. I actually do it in the sitting room, which I do next. And I mix up one of the bedrooms upstairs. Well, two of the bedrooms, technically. Because it's kind of difficult, even though I did have the floor plans, you're looking down at a floor plan, and sometimes it's hard to keep it straight. I have a very scattered brain. I am a scatterbrain. So sometimes I have to go back and fix what I did. But it's totally worth it to get some level of authenticity to it. It's not going to be perfect, and I did have to move things around and make it actually usable for The Sims, which this is fully play-tested, by the way. Yeah. I just had to kind of move and play and change things whenever I needed. I had to go in and edit this video down a lot because there were a lot of sections where I just stopped building because I was looking at my reference material. And it was just, you know, the screen staring, like, it would just stop right here. And just, it would be a fireplace for a good, like, 2-3 minutes. So I had to go in and chop out a lot of just stopping. I have a lot to learn when it comes to recording YouTube videos. And I hope that, you know, this is at least watchable. And that, you know, you don't feel yourself getting a headache or completely wondering why or how I skipped things. So, again, any comments or suggestions that you have, I'm entirely open. And, you know, if you think I'm awful, or you think Lizzie Borden is, like, the coolest or the worst, let me know. I always like having conversations about would-be murderers. Could have been murderers. May be murderers. I'm sure there's a term out there for that, but whatever. So here I am working on the dining room. Their dining table actually does have this really, of course, god-awful tablecloth on it. But we don't have any base game, tables that have tablecloths, so I just went with a regular one that just seemed like it fit in the time. So if there's something that I'm not sure of, or I know I don't actually have a version of, I'll just try and find something that just looks time appropriate, so era appropriate, if you will. That little globe. I fought with that for way longer than you saw, trying to get it on top of that little cabinet curio thing there, and ended up scrapping it. I have decided that I hate that globe. And me and that globe no longer get along. Again, you see me messing with the windows here, taking away those floating windows in the yard. I guess I thought I might need them at some point. Who knows? So here I am working on, I guess this is the sitting room. And this is where Lizzie's father went to take his nap. And his body was actually discovered and photographed on that couch. So I end up moving the couch because it's actually in the wrong place. But so that dark colored couch, it's very infamous. Because there is a picture of it. Of course it's in black and white, but you can look it up. You can find these pictures. I'm not going to post pictures of the actual bodies or the crime scene just because I don't want to be responsible for giving people nightmares directly. Like, if you have nightmares just from the little story that I told you, I am sorry. I never meant to ruin your sleep. Sleep is important. It keeps you young. Or at least it attempts to. But I didn't want to get gruesome with this. Even though it's a rather gruesome tale, I didn't want to get gruesome with the actual video. By the way, just as a side note, I thought it was really funny. My intro, I spent a long time making that little walkthrough of the building, and I love the dynamic between, like, my channel intro and then that one. It was like this dark, brooding piano music, and then all of a sudden it shifts into this, like, light, tinkly sound. You just saw me put in all of the cheats that I use. By the way, it's night now in the build because I stopped recording and then I started again. And, you know, it's nighttime. That fits with the eeriness of this house. AKA, I forgot to change it to afternoon instead of morning. So that's why it's so dark outside in the build now. Anyway, I just put in all of my cheats that I use because I did start recording again. And I use, of course, move objects a lot. I use show hidden objects so you can get, like, the debug menu. And I use the ignore player gameplay unlocks entitlement. So yeah, ignore gameplay unlocks entitlement. You just do that in the cheats menu, and that will allow you to get all of the unlockable items for careers and things, like the certain counters you can get for getting farther in culinary careers, like those pots and pans that are hanging in the kitchen are actually from that unlock menu. So that just gives you more to work with, especially when you're doing a limited pack or a base game only build. You want to have access to as many things as you can, just to add a little more variety to your builds, or at least I do. That's why I use those cheats specifically. One thing I want to point out about this floor plan is that the front and back of the second story are not accessible from one another. So that's why I had to leave in the 2 staircases, which there are 2 staircases in the actual Borden house, but I had to leave those in because there's no way to get to the like master bedroom here where the parents slept and this bathroom over here on the right hand side from the stairway in the front. So that's just an interesting little tidbit of how the house is set up. I guess older houses had really strange setups, and I took some screenshots of like these hallways because they are really tight hallways and really creepy hallways in my opinion. That's why old houses are so creepy, because everything's so dark and tightly packed together. I actually cut it out here in a minute, but I do go in and I change all of these lights so this house has like a yellowed effect. I wanted it to remain really well lit up, even though it technically didn't have electricity at the time. I couldn't see putting like candelabras everywhere. This didn't belong to, like Vlad the Impaler or anything. So I just go in and I do some more antiqued kind of lights. So here you can see, I talked about it earlier, I accidentally switched up the rooms. This was Emma's room, Lizzie's sister's room, and then the room over on the right of that I did before with kind of the catty-cornered bed right there, that was Lizzie's actual room. So this is Emma's room. The room to the right of that, with the pink curtains, that was the dressing room for her stepmother. And then this far bedroom, the green one, that is the guest room, and that is where Abby's body was discovered. Little, walkthrough of the house there. I don't know if that made sense, but so if you walked up the stairs, you went straight into Lizzie's room. To the left was Emma's room, and all the way, and then down the hallway to the left was the guest room, and that is where Abby was murdered. And when her father was murdered, they had a housekeeper, right? Or some kind of, like maid, a house servant of some sort. And Lizzie called up the stairs from the sitting room downstairs and said, "Help, someone came in and killed my father." And then, the maid runs down and she's like, "Yeah, it was you." Like she was 100% convinced. Like what? A crazy person ran into the house, murdered your father, and it just happened to be right after somebody ran in the house and murdered your stepmother? Like, nothing made sense about her story. Here I'm in the creepy murder basement, and there you see I put some knives on the wall. We don't have hatchets. I know you can have axes, at least, if you have extreme violence, a mod for this game, but I actually don't enjoy extreme violence as much as some people do. I don't know what the word is for it. I'm kind of chronically empathetic, so I have a hard time with brutal things. Anyway, I could talk about that for years, and I'm sure I will in future builds. But so I moved back on the outside. I pretty much finished up the inside. There are a couple of things I do here and there, but now I realized that there were no stairs leading into the kitchen doorway, and I do a little bit more landscaping, but we're basically coming up to the end of the build. Totally just burped. I'm gonna leave that in. I don't know. I've made it this far. But, oh my gosh, I just want to say that those railings to those stairs can kiss my butt, and these bushes can also kiss my butt, and I'm not 100% sure that I got them right. I'm pretty sure that they're off. But I'll go in and fix them later, of course. This is available on the gallery to download, so you can look it up under ItsLoolyLoo, like my channel name. And you can download this and you can play as the Bordens. I did make Lizzie her stepmother and stepfather. I did not make her sister. Maybe I should go in and add her to the family. But so you can play it as them if you so choose. I just realized we are not coming up to the end of the build because I actually furnished that little back building. I make it kind of like a little studio. Because in the house there was a small piano or harpsichord or something, and then there were art supplies because, of course, Lizzie had to burn her dress because she was painting. So that's what I turned this little back section into. Again, I'm not sure what it is. If you know what it is, please let me know. I can always go in and change it to make it as accurate as possible. But I think this works, and it gives your Sims something to do. When you do these historical builds, there's kind of nothing for them to do, because there's no computers or, like cool games or anything. It's all just like reading books and being sad because you're living in a patriarchal hellhole.
Anyway, which, by the way, speaking of, the patriarchy did come in handy for some things. That's probably the reason Lizzie Borden got away with what she got away with. Because she was just a little woman. How could she murder someone with an axe or a hatchet? You know? If I lived 100 years ago, sure, the rest of my life would be completely awful, but I could have literally gotten away with murder. Not that I would. Again, I have a problem. I have a problem stepping on ants. I don't kill spiders. I don't know. I have a lot of fear of death, I suppose, when it comes to anyone. I don't want anyone to die. I want us all to be Highlanders and to live forever. So now we are actually coming towards the end. I just furnished this front room here. Kind of make it a little more inviting, even though this home is not exactly what I would call inviting. But, again, thank you so much for checking out my first build. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you found it interesting learning a little bit about the house. If there's anything I forgot that you think is really important, or anything you want to add to the story of Lizzie Borden, and maybe your theories on what could have happened, please leave it in the comments below. Yeah, I hope that you come back and you check out my next build. I hope that I can do many more historic builds, and maybe even some non-historic builds. Maybe I'll just do a suburban on the corner. So, thanks again, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Like this video, subscribe if you want. Yeah, thanks.
Girl, she did